The alien girl called humans inferior, then he pressed her against the wall. Dax could hear her breathe before he saw her, soft, measured, dangerously calm. Light from the overhead panels flickered across the corridor, illuminating momentary glimpses of a sleek silhouette and the faint luminescence of teal skin. He inched forward, knuckles flexing in anticipation. A single drip of sweat slid down his neck, and for an instant, time seemed to stall. She tilted her head, her glowing eyes fixed on him, unreadable. "Stand aside, human," came her first words, cutting the silence like a blade. It wasn't a plea. It was a command. Dax's response died on his tongue as he absorbed her presence. She was taller than he expected, slender but formidable, dressed in a form-fitting, alien polymer suit that emphasized long limbs and coils of braided hair clinging to her skull like living armor. He had cornered her in the base's restricted corridor after an alarm signaled a break-in. Only minutes earlier, she had effortlessly taken out 2 armed guards. Now, with the overhead sirens blinking scarlet in the distance, he wasn't sure if he had trapped her, or she had trapped him. She stepped closer, eyeing him as though he were a trivial obstacle. "Your species never learns," she continued, voice resonating with a subharmonic cadence that made Dax's pulse pound against his rib cage. "You cling to your illusions of strength, yet you fall so easily." His hands twitched in reflex. He was used to intimidation tactics, cunning thieves, genetically modified soldiers, monstrous war beasts. But this was different. Her voice had a gravitational pull, urging him to either charge or flee. He resisted both impulses, meeting her gaze with hard, unblinking defiance. "Big talk," he finally managed, his voice low. "Let's see if you can back it up." She smiled, revealing the barest hint of sharp canines. An alien physiology indeed. This close, he noticed the faint glow emanating from her chest and trailing to the tips of her fingers, as if each cell in her body carried a reservoir of bioluminescent energy. "I already have," she purred. "Your soldiers barely put up a fight." He lunged, bridging the distance in a single stride. She spun elegantly, evading his grapple with feline grace. He managed to catch her wrist, and for one electrifying moment, they were locked in a brief struggle. Her skin felt warmer than any human's, a subtle heat that pulsed beneath the surface. She twisted free, forcing him back a step. A triumphant gleam flickered in her golden irises. Dax found a breathless laugh escaping him, half adrenaline, half disbelief. "Not bad," he muttered, wiping a streak of sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. Then he cracked his knuckles, an echoing sound that reverberated in the enclosed hall. "But you're trespassing on Terran soil." The corners of her lips curved upward, bemused. "Terran soil," she repeated, as if the words themselves were a cosmic joke. "You're primitive in your claims, your walls, your illusions of ownership. Earth is just a tiny corner of a vast tapestry." She glided toward him, movements a silent challenge. "And you, Dax, are merely the latest to stand in my path." He froze. She knew his name. That meant she had done her research, or someone had leaked his identity. His heart rate spiked, not just from the tension of combat, but from something else, something he refused to identify as intrigue. He measured her for weaknesses, but every inch of her radiated confidence. The corridor lights flickered again. Backup security teams would arrive soon, guns drawn. Dax spoke through clenched teeth. "You say you came for something important. You left a body count in your wake. Mind explaining why?" She shrugged elegantly. "Your people insisted on intercepting me. I had no intention of leaving casualties if I could help it. But your species is stubborn. I had to adapt." "Adapt?" Dax repeated in a dark rasp. "That's one way to justify murder." A siren wailed anew, louder this time, accompanied by the trampling of boots from the corridor intersection. She shifted her focus to the approaching noise. Dax spotted the momentary tension in her posture, an almost imperceptible stiffening. That micro-flinch told him she wasn't invincible. She just wore her bravado like a battle shield. He seized the opportunity. With a single surge, he closed the distance and pinned her against the wall. The cold metal plating pressed into her back, and his forearm braced across her collarbone. Her luminous eyes narrowed, but she didn't look afraid. If anything, she looked intrigued. "This is how humans show their dominance," she whispered, voice still carrying that seductive undertone that vibrated through his bones. "So crude." Dax tightened his hold but refrained from actual harm. "Stay quiet if you want to survive," he growled. "My reinforcements are closing in, and they'll shoot first. Ask questions never. If you're not lying about your mission, this is the only chance you get to explain." She tilted her head, considering. For a moment, he thought she might lash out, but a sudden flicker of alarm cut through the expression on her face. A new klaxon erupted, deeper and more urgent. Dax recognized the shift in the alarm's pattern, a full-scale assault on the base. Someone else was here. She gave him a pointed, almost mocking glance. "Perhaps we can continue our discussion elsewhere, Terran." A team of heavily armed guards stormed into view. Dax had two options: let them handle this intruder or whisk her away to interrogate her properly. But these guards weren't in the mood for questions. Their rifles snapped to firing position. "Get down!" the squad leader yelled, training his weapon on the alien woman. "Hands above your head!" She exhaled slowly, eyes flicking between Dax and the men, irritation etched into her features. Dax sensed it too. If she refused, there'd be a bloody standoff right here. He released her and turned to the squad. "Stand down," he barked. "She's a high-value target. We need her alive." The squad leader, a broad-shouldered man with a face full of scars, scowled at Dax. "We have orders to secure or eliminate. She's not cooperating. That means lethal force." "Orders change," Dax snapped, stepping in front of the barrels. He wasn't on great terms with the upper brass after his rogue missions, but he had enough lingering authority to stall them. For a heartbeat, tension crackled in the corridor, as if the air itself weighed heavy with the possibility of violence. Then the base shook violently, throwing everyone off balance. A distant explosion rattled the steel beams, and emergency lights flickered from red to black. The corridor plunged into darkness, lit only by the alien's glowing eyes and the occasional spark from overhead wiring. "Backup generators engaged," the squad leader shouted into his comm, but static was the only reply. Another tremor, heavier than before, tore through the walls. Within seconds, everything around them devolved into dust and noise. Amid the chaos, Dax felt slender fingers grip his wrist. He twisted around, caught a glimpse of teal skin and those golden eyes. "Your fortress is compromised," she said, voice almost drowned out by the shrieking alarms. "More forces are coming for me, and for you." Her tone was urgent, lacking the usual condescension. Something told Dax this was bigger than a simple infiltration. He was about to respond when the corridor behind them collapsed with a deafening roar, severing them from the Terran squad. Dust and debris rained down, forcing him to duck his head. In the near darkness, he felt her pull him forward. He resisted on instinct, but the base was caving in around them. They had no choice but to move. Together, they sprinted through twisting tunnels, the emergency lighting casting shadows that danced like phantoms against the walls. At any moment, the whole structure could buckle. He slammed open a pressurized door, pushing her inside first, then barricaded it shut. The thunder of collapsing metal reverberated from beyond. She stood in the center of the small cargo bay, catching her breath, though she appeared less winded than he was. Her body language was tense, alert, but not fearful. "Why are they attacking now?" Dax hissed, wiping blood from a fresh cut on his forehead. "Isn't this your operation?" She shot him a glare. "Do I look like I'd rely on brute force to storm your base? If you must know, I came alone. Someone else wants to make sure I don't leave." A bitter laugh escaped him. "So you're saying we have a common enemy?" "I'm saying we both die if we don't get out of here." She lifted her chin, defiance evident even in these dire circumstances. "I can handle myself, but I doubt you humans appreciate the firepower headed our way. It's beyond your scope." He bristled at her superiority complex, but part of him suspected she might be right. The sudden precision of the assault, the advanced weaponry strong enough to breach Terran defenses. None of it boded well. He had no love for the Terran authorities, but this place had once been a safe haven. Now it was a smoking ruin. Before he could argue, an explosion rocked the cargo bay doors, and a chunk of reinforced steel flew inward. They both ducked for cover behind a massive crate. A squad of black-armored mercenaries poured in, scanning the space with advanced optics. "They're not Terran," Dax murmured under his breath, recognizing the streamlined exoskeletons. "Who the hell hired them?" Salira's lips tightened. "They're not exactly my biggest admirers. Let's just say I parted ways with some powerful players." "Great," Dax muttered, pulling a compact pistol from his belt. He glanced at her. She had no visible weapon, just that lethal aura. "Stay behind me," he commanded. She let out a scoff. "I'd rather not. But if you insist." In a swirl of movement, Dax rose from cover and fired off several rounds at the advancing mercenaries. Sparks and ricochets danced across the cargo bay. One merc dropped, but the others advanced swiftly, returning fire in a deadly volley that forced him back behind the crate. Salira crouched beside him. He caught her gaze, noticing a flicker of excitement in her eyes. "Are all human men this reckless?" she teased, though her breathing was rapid. He bit back a retort and checked his magazine. Only a few shots left. "If you have some alien trick up your sleeve, now's the time." Her eyes narrowed in challenge. "I do. But it won't be pretty." She leapt to her feet, extending her arms. A shimmering distortion rippled across her hands and spread outward. The temperature in the cargo bay skyrocketed in an instant, as if invisible heatwaves poured from her body. The mercenaries hesitated, thrown off balance by the sudden, disorienting shift. Dax watched in stunned fascination as she advanced, weaving gracefully through the hail of gunfire. Her swirling aura of heat deflected or warped the bullets' trajectories just enough to prevent direct hits. Then the shimmer intensified, and the lead merc collapsed, clutching his helmet as though his skull were on fire. Two more dropped, their suits steaming. Dax could smell the acrid stench of melting polymer. He shot the last merc who remained on his feet, ending the threat. The cargo bay fell silent except for the crackle of damaged equipment. Salira staggered, bracing herself against a nearby wall, breathing heavily. Dax rushed to her side, half expecting her to lash out. But she was clearly drained, her skin's glow flickering unevenly. He caught her shoulders. "That was reckless," he snapped, voice edged with concern. "Your heat manipulation, or whatever you did, it almost fried you too." She gave him a defiant look, though her voice trembled slightly. "It got the job done." He exhaled, his chest tight with conflicting emotions. This wasn't how he imagined his day, fighting alongside an alien saboteur with powers he couldn't fully understand. Yet he couldn't deny that they were alive because of her. An overhead crash reminded them the base was still under siege. Smoke seeped through a ventilation grate, and lights flickered ominously. Salira tried to stand upright, pushing off his grip, but her legs wobbled. His instincts flared. He swept an arm under her shoulders, steadying her. "Let go," she hissed. "I don't need your help." He ignored the protest, guiding her toward a side hatch. "The main exit's probably sealed off. But this leads to a maintenance shaft connecting to an emergency transport." They stumbled through the wreckage, weaving around burning debris. An unconscious Terran guard lay slumped against a console. Dax spared a second to check for vitals, found a faint pulse, then grimaced. "We can't carry him," he muttered. "We'll have to send a rescue team after we secure an escape." She didn't reply, her breaths labored. The short corridor ended at a heavy blast door. Dax keyed in a security override, cursing when the system blinked red. He pounded the panel. "Damn it! Power's cut here." Salira placed a trembling hand against the door. "I can't melt solid steel if that's what you're hoping," she rasped. He let out a humorless chuckle. "No, but maybe we can bypass it." He scanned the emergency schematics mounted on the wall. "Yes. There's a secondary corridor around the perimeter. It's tight, But we can squeeze through. They retraced their steps, ignoring the distant gunfire that echoed through the failing corridors. Bits of metal rained from the ceiling as structural integrity dipped alarmingly. Eventually, they reached a narrow access tunnel, barely wide enough for a single person. Go, Dax instructed, nudging her forward. I'll cover the rear. Salira shot him a glare that was more prideful than hostile, then crawled into the cramped space. He followed, inching along behind her, trying not to focus on the heat emanating from her body. The air in the shaft was stifling, laced with dust and the pungent tang of burning wires. It felt like hours before they emerged into a dimly lit storage bay, the emergency transport cradle looming ahead. A small craft, squat, built for quick evacuation, not comfort, rested on its rails. Dax hurried to the controls, but a violent shudder threw him off balance. We need to launch now, Salira urged. She was leaning against the crate, struggling to maintain composure. Whatever is attacking will breach this base soon. He slammed a fist against the control panel. Power's minimal. We'll have life support for an hour at best if we launch. She straightened, adjusting her posture like a queen regaining her throne. An hour is better than death, she said calmly. Dax didn't argue. He keyed the ignition sequence. Sparks flew from the console, but the craft's engines rumbled to life. He hurried inside, gesturing for her to follow. She slipped into the passenger seat, exhaling in relief as she slumped against the harness. The craft hissed free from its docking clamps. Dax manipulated the thrusters, guiding them out of the crumbling base. Fire and rubble consumed the facility behind them. A pang of guilt stabbed him at the thought of those left behind, but he knew there was no time for rescue. This place was lost. They burst through a reinforced gate into open skies, dark, storm-laden clouds illuminated by the flickers of anti-air artillery. Dax wove through debris, smoke, and streaks of laser fire, pushing the transport's engines to their limit. Then, with a final jolt, they cleared the immediate combat zone, rocketing over the horizon. Only when they were safely out of range did Dax risk a glance at Salira. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. The interior lights played across her features, highlighting the delicate ridges along her temples. She seemed almost vulnerable. The same creature who'd just incinerated a squad of mercenaries minutes ago. His chest tightened. We'll set down a few clicks away, he said, keeping his voice neutral. Find somewhere to regroup. She opened her eyes, the glow subdued but present. Then what? Then you tell me why you're really here, and we decide if we're going to kill each other or not. A faint smirk curved her lips, though it was tinged with exhaustion. I suppose that's fair enough, she murmured. Just remember, Terran, this changes nothing. I still find your species inferior. He almost laughed at the spark in her tone, even now. Noted. He returned his attention to the controls, the turbulent sky swirling around them. Outside, the ashes of the base burned bright against the rolling darkness, a grim testament to the uneasy alliance they'd just formed. They flew in strained silence, each lost in adrenaline-fueled thoughts. The battered transport trembled with each gust of wind, but it held together long enough for Dax to spot a clearing in the distance, a stretch of rugged terrain dotted with sparse vegetation and half-collapsed structures from a war that ended years ago. He angled the craft downward, fighting the crosswinds as best he could until they touched down with a bone-jarring thud. Metal creaked as the landing gear struggled to hold, but it held. Dax flicked the engine switch off, plunging them into near darkness save for a faint emergency glow. He reached for the harness release, every muscle in his body screaming in protest. As he glanced over, he saw Salira struggling with her harness. Without a word, he leaned over and unbuckled it, his hand brushing against her arm. Her gaze snapped to his, unspoken tension crackling. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then she looked away with a quiet huff, pushing him aside. I'm fine, she mumbled. They exited the craft, and Dax surveyed their surroundings. Crumbling walls and fractured rooftops jutted out of the ground like broken teeth. This place must have been a frontier settlement before the war. Now, it was just another graveyard. Salira stumbled slightly, and Dax instinctively caught her elbow. She shook him off. I said I'm fine, she repeated, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her fatigue. Suit yourself, he replied evenly. He moved to scan the perimeter, flipping down a small visor from his gear belt. The scanner beeped softly. No immediate hostiles, but there was no guarantee that would last. We should find shelter. She nodded once, her expression all business now. Agreed. We can't stay in the open. They picked their way through the debris, eventually finding a small shack still partially intact. The roof seemed stable, and there was only one entrance, a clear vantage point. Dax tested the door, found it jammed. He kicked it in with a swift boot, and the metal hinges gave a protesting squeal. Inside, dust motes swirled in the weak light filtering through a half-collapsed wall. The remains of a rusted bunk, an overturned table, and some storage crates greeted them like relics of a forgotten era. Dax cleared debris to make a small space where they could rest. Salira sank down on one of the crates, exhaling slowly. He crouched near her. So, are you going to tell me why the base was attacked? Or do I have to guess? She ran a hand over her braided tendrils. I told you I came alone. Someone must have tracked me. The ones who attacked are from a private army funded by factions within my empire. They want to silence me. Dax folded his arms, annoyance sparking in his eyes. Silence you about what? Don't try to sell me half-truths. She lifted her gaze, meeting his with a steely challenge. Your Terran leadership was supposed to host me for peace negotiations. But there's an internal power struggle in my empire. Certain individuals prefer war. They want to sabotage any talk of treaties. So they framed you for infiltration? A bitter laugh escaped her. I hardly need framing. I did infiltrate your base, but to speak with Terran officials who had the clearance for these negotiations. Your guards panicked, shots were fired, I had to defend myself. And here we are. Dax resisted the urge to call her a liar. Something in her tone rang with sincerity, or at least partial truth. Your people want war. Why do you want peace? Salira's gaze flickered away, just for a second. Because war would consume both sides. Your planet would be devastated, and my people would suffer catastrophic losses. Some of us believe in avoiding that fate. Her voice softened, a rare moment of genuine emotion. Then the arrogance returned. Not that we need your pity. We just see no benefit in annihilating an entire species, even one as misguided as humans. He let out a slow breath, forcing down the anger that surged each time she implied her superiority. So you're on Earth to negotiate a truce that could stop a war your own people are orchestrating from the shadows. She tilted her chin up. Precisely. And those mercenaries who stormed your base are an extension of those who'd rather see me dead than return with any peace agreement. Dax shook his head, the weight of her words settling in. This was bigger than he'd imagined. Earth's future, no, the entire Terran system, caught in a web of alien politics. And here he was, alone with the very enemy he once swore to fight. He glanced at her arms, noticing the faint tremor still there. Your powers, he started. I've never seen anything like that. Is it some sort of technology? She scoffed, rolling her neck to ease the tension in her shoulders. If you must know, we adapt genetically to survive in harsh environments. Controlling thermal outputs is second nature for my kind. Though pushing it to weaponized levels. She trailed off, face tightening with pain. It takes a toll. He studied her. You should rest. She flashed a sharp grin. Worried about me, Terran? He kept his expression neutral. I need you alive if I'm going to get any answers. That's all. She let out an amused hum. Of course. He walked away, giving her space. The small shack offered limited shelter, but at least the walls weren't about to cave in. He positioned himself by the entrance, scanning the horizon with his visor. Nightfall would come soon, and with it, potential patrols. He didn't trust her. No matter what she said, she was still an alien operative. Yet an uneasy alliance was better than being hunted alone. The minutes stretched on, thick with tension neither of them addressed. Selira stared at the dim glow of her fingertips, occasionally flexing them as if testing her strength. Dax forced himself to focus on the perimeter, but he couldn't ignore the subtle presence behind him, her quiet breathing, the occasional shift of her body. Finally, she broke the silence. "This vendetta you carry. I can taste the bitterness on you." He tensed. "Mind your own business." She stood, crossing the short distance to him in a few graceful strides. "Your hostility isn't just about me being alien," she murmured, voice dropping into that resonant, unsettling frequency. "I sense you've lost something. Someone." Dax bristled, memories of his brother's execution stabbing at him. "You're overstepping," he growled, turning to face her fully. "You don't know a damn thing about me." She arched an eyebrow, not retreating in the slightest. "Does it matter? We both have ghosts that haunt us." He snorted derisively, trying to stifle the flicker of shared pain he saw in her eyes. "Don't compare your empire's machinations to what I've been through." Her gaze narrowed. The air between them sparked with a mutual anger neither quite understood. Then an unexpected roar echoed outside, an engine, or multiple engines, drawing closer. Dax froze, pressing a finger to his lips for silence. They stepped to the battered doorway, peering out into the twilight. Two sleek hovercrafts glided among the ruins, scanning with piercing spotlights. The hair on Dax's neck stood on end. These were advanced models, not typical Terran or even standard alien tech. She pressed a hand lightly on his shoulder. "They must have tracked us," she whispered. "We can't fight them out in the open." His mind raced. They had limited firepower, and she was still weakened from the earlier display. Another direct confrontation would be suicide. "We need a distraction," he whispered back. "If we can lure them away, we might slip out through the back." A plan formed quickly, though it was half-baked at best. He rummaged through the shack, finding some scraps of metal and an old power cell from a defunct energy rifle. With a bit of wiring, he rigged a crude explosive device that would generate a bright flash and a concussive wave. Selira observed with mild fascination. "Your people excel at improvisation," she commented. "Yeah," he muttered, not sure whether to take that as a compliment or more condescension. "Let's hope it works." He placed the improvised bomb near the entrance, set a short timer, then gestured for Selira to follow him through a gap in the shack's rear wall. They moved quietly around the rubble, each footstep measured. Dax counted the seconds in his head. Right on cue, a deafening burst lit up the night, followed by a shockwave that rattled the ruins. Shouts and flashes of weapon fire erupted from the direction of the shack. The hovercrafts converged on the source of the explosion. Under cover of that chaos, Dax and Selira slipped into a dark alley formed by two half-collapsed buildings. He risked a glance back, seeing the searchlights now trained on the smoldering remnants of the shack. Soldiers in black combat suits fanned out, scanning for survivors. Dax tried to stay calm, but adrenaline coursed through his veins, urging him to run faster, breathe harder. Selira matched his pace despite her earlier exhaustion. As they ducked under a fallen beam, she caught his arm, halting him. "Wait," she whispered, her golden eyes searching his face. "Where are we headed?" He shook her grip loose, flicking open a holographic display on his wrist. A small map of the region fizzled into view. "There's an old comms tower about half a mile northeast. If we can power it up, maybe we can get a signal out and figure out who's orchestrating this assault. Or at least call for help." She nodded, the subtlest frown tugging at her lips. "And if no one answers?" He exhaled. "Then we improvise again." They continued through the ruins, the night thick with tension. Every sound, creaking metal, the flutter of battered banners in the wind, felt like a potential threat. Yet they moved together seamlessly, covering each other's blind spots. Despite their differences, survival bound them in a fragile alliance. Eventually, they saw the broken silhouette of the comms tower rising against the starless sky. Its base was half collapsed, the top leaning precariously, but it might still have functional equipment. They approached cautiously, weaving between the remains of shipping containers and gutted vehicles. At the tower's base, Dax forced open a metal hatch. The interior corridor stank of mold and old oil, but it seemed stable enough. Emergency lights flickered, powered by some vestigial generator. He led Salira deeper inside, searching for the control room. The corridor ended at a reinforced door. A keypad glowed faintly, awaiting input. Dax tried a few override codes from his old Terran credentials. To his surprise, the door clicked open. Inside, dust coated a row of consoles. Monitors sat dormant, but a humming noise suggested some power remained. Salira brushed her fingers across the panels, eyes narrowing. This technology is laughably outdated. He ignored the jab and started flipping switches. All we need is a short-range broadcast. If anyone's out there, we can patch through. After several tries, one of the monitors came to life, static flickering across the screen. Dax keyed a frequency, cycling through channels. Nothing but dead air. He felt an unpleasant twist in his gut. Maybe there was no one left to answer. Salira tapped a few keys, her luminous eyes scanning the data readouts. I sense a remote signal. Very faint. She pointed to a coordinate readout. It's coming from your base's old emergency beacon. Possibly from survivors. Dax's stomach clenched. Could there be other Terrans still alive in that rubble? Or was it a trap from the mercenaries? He pressed a hand against the console, wrestling with indecision. She studied his face. We might not have much time. If they're your people, they'll need help. He tightened his jaw. You're not making the decision for me. Wouldn't dream of it, she said softly, stepping back. He blew out a breath. Fine. Let's see what we can do. If that signal is real, maybe we can help them, or at least get some intel. He set the tower's systems to amplify the beacon, hoping to establish a line of communication. While the console struggled to comply, a distant roar reverberated outside. The mercenaries were still hunting. They couldn't stay here long. The screen beeped. A garbled voice crackled over the speakers. Dax's eyes widened. Help pinned down, outside the main compound. The transmission dissolved into static. Salira glanced at him. They're alive. Dax swallowed hard, the old soldier instincts flaring. Then I have to help. She nodded slowly, though tension creased her brow. That means going back into danger. He turned off the console, setting it to stand by. I know. If you want to go your own way, this is your chance. She held his gaze for a moment, golden eyes locked with his. Then she reached out, brushing her fingers against his wrist. A brief, heated touch. We started this together. We finish it together. His pulse thrummed at that contact, though he refused to acknowledge it. Fine. Let's move. They exited the control room, hearts pounding. Outside, the night seemed darker, the air thick with the threat of violence. They were about to dive back into the storm of conflict, risking their lives for unknown survivors in a wrecked Terran base. But something had shifted between them. A fragile, unspoken truce bound them now, no less combative, no less intense, but charged with a fleeting spark of mutual respect. As they vanished into the shadows, Dax could feel Salira's presence close behind. Every step was a calculated risk, every breath a reminder that they might not see another sunrise. And yet, in the midst of fear, an undeniable tension pulsed, an awareness of each other's heat and heartbeat that refused to be ignored. He said nothing, and neither did she. But the silence carried a promise. The real battle had only just begun. They covered the distance swiftly, sticking to back alleys and natural cover, avoiding the roving lights of the mercenaries' hovercrafts. The battered terrain tested their stamina, each broken wall and collapsed street forcing them to climb or crawl. Dax led, scanning the horizon with his visor, and Salira followed, still showing signs of strain but pushing onward relentlessly. At last, they arrived at a vantage point overlooking what was left of the Terran base's perimeter. The scene below was grim: collapsed structures, scorched earth, and jagged craters. Sporadic gunfire crackled through the darkness, punctuated by the flicker of muzzle flashes. Dax raised a small scope to his eye. He spotted a cluster of Terran survivors pinned against a collapsed bunker. They were outnumbered and outgunned by mercenaries in black armor. Salira crouched beside him, her breathing shallow as she peered at the carnage. "We need a diversion," Dax murmured. "Or they'll be cut down before we get close." She closed her eyes, summoning what remained of her strength. "I can generate one more thermal surge, but it won't be as strong as before." He nodded, mind already formulating a plan. "That might be enough. I'll take out as many as I can. When you see an opening, unleash whatever you've got left." She smiled wryly, though her face was pale. "And here I thought humans didn't trust easily." He shrugged. "I don't. But right now you're my best shot." They didn't waste time on further words. Synchronizing their approach, they crept down the shattered hillside. The mercenaries' attention was locked on the bunker, giving Dax and Salira the chance to close in from behind. Dax counted at least 10 hostiles, maybe more. He motioned for Salira to hold, then took aim with a scavenged rifle. He steadied his breathing, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. His first shot dropped one merc instantly. A second merc whirled, returning fire, but Dax had already moved to new cover, landing 2 more shots that took out another. Chaos erupted among the mercenaries. Some dove for cover, others blindly fired at the muzzle flashes. Salira moved through the darkness like a wraith, flanking them from the side. When enough of them had clustered, she unleashed a pulse of heat that rippled through the air, shorting out sensors and stunning the unprepared soldiers. The Terran survivors seized the moment, unleashing a volley of return fire. In seconds, the mercenary line crumbled. Some tried to retreat, others collapsed under the combined assault. Dax sprinted forward, bullets whizzing past his shoulder. He reached the last merc and slammed the butt of his rifle into the soldier's neck with ruthless precision. The man went limp, armor clanging against rubble. An eerie silence fell. Smoke and dust settled over the battered ground. One of the Terran survivors crawled out from behind the bunker, a bloody bandage wrapped around his torso. Recognition flickered in his eyes when he saw Dax. "Dax, never thought I'd see you again," the man rasped, struggling to stand. Dax rushed to support him. "You know me. I never was good at staying dead." Salira approached slowly, keeping her distance. The Terrans eyed her with a mix of shock and hostility. Dax raised a hand, gesturing for them to lower their weapons. "She's with me," he stated, though the phrase tasted strange on his tongue. "We wouldn't have taken out these mercs without her help." The man nodded warily. "We appreciate it. The name's Radek. We got separated from the main squad when the base fell. Been holed up here, pinned down for hours." Dax cast a glance around. "How many of you?" Radek grimaced. "Me and 3 others." At his signal, a few more battered soldiers emerged from cover. They looked exhausted, wounded, but relieved to be alive. Salira's glowing eyes flicked over them. She kept silent, likely sensing their fear and distrust. Dax cleared his throat. "We need to regroup, find safer ground. You're in no shape to keep fighting." Radek grimaced. "We have transport, partially damaged, but fixable. Problem is, we're short on parts." He gestured to a half-buried vehicle near the bunker's exit. It was a Terran troop carrier, half its plating stripped away and one engine fuming black smoke. "Of course," Dax muttered. "We'll see what we can do. Might salvage from the wreckage." Salira knelt by one of the wounded soldiers, ignoring the man's flinch at her proximity. She examined his bleeding leg, then tore a strip from her own suit's sleeve, which clung to her teal skin. She wrapped it around the wound with surprisingly gentle hands. The soldier stared at her in disbelief, but didn't protest. Dax noticed a subtle shift in her posture, tired but resolute. She was an enigma, so dismissive of human life one moment, then compassionate enough to help a stranger the next. He bit down on his thoughts, focusing on the task at hand. The group gathered near the disabled carrier. Dax and Radek pried open the hood, rummaging through tangled wires and melted circuits. "We need a new converter," Radek explained, pointing to the charred remains of a vital component. "Otherwise, she won't fly." Dax grimaced, scanning the horizon for a possible donor vehicle. The entire base was in ruins, so salvage might be scarce. But a glint of metal in the distance caught his eye. "What's that?" Radek shrugged. "Looks like a downed transport. Could be something we can use." Without another word, Dax set off, Salira at his side. The two of them walked in silence across the scarred terrain, stepping over twisted girders and half-buried corpses, both Terran and mercenary. The air was thick with the reek of burned fuel and scorched flesh. At last, they reached the crash site, a smaller vessel, battered beyond recognition. Dax knelt, trying to pry open a panel. Salira joined him, using her heated touch to melt a few stubborn bolts. Inside, wires and conduits lay in disarray, but a converter module seemed intact. "This could work," Dax muttered, carefully extracting the piece. Salira's gaze swept the surrounding rubble. "We should hurry," she warned. "More mercenaries may be on their way." He nodded, tucking the converter under his arm. As they stood, a flicker of movement drew his eye. He froze, spotting a lone figure crawling from beneath the wreck. It was a merc, bloodied and delirious, but alive enough to raise his pistol. Salira moved first, a blur of teal and muscle. She grabbed the merc's wrist, twisting until the weapon clattered away. The man let out a choked cry, eyes wide with terror at the sight of her. Don't kill me," he sputtered. Dax approached, scowling. "Your people slaughtered half the base. Why should we spare you?" The merc coughed, spitting out blood. "I was following orders. We didn't know what she was." His gaze flicked to Salira, full of hatred and fear. "We were told she'd turn the planet's defense systems against us. That you were all traitors." Salira's jaw tightened. "A convenient lie," she muttered. Dax considered the broken soldier at their feet. Part of him wanted to pull the trigger in vengeance. Another part knew that wouldn't change anything. Slowly, he shook his head. "Enough blood has been spilled." She released the man's wrist, and he slumped to the ground, gasping. Dax stooped to pick up the pistol, removing its power cell. "Get out of here," he ordered. "Tell whoever sent you that they failed." The merc needed no second invitation, scrambling away in panic. Salira watched him go, her face unreadable. When she turned back to Dax, there was the faintest flicker of respect in her golden eyes. "Sometimes mercy is the stronger choice," she murmured, though her tone lacked its usual sarcasm. He slung the converter under one arm. "I'm not saying it is or isn't," he replied quietly. "But we have bigger fights to worry about." They returned to the Terran survivors, installing the converter as quickly as possible. Sparks flew, but eventually the carrier's engine whirred back to life with a strained growl. Dax climbed into the cockpit, flicking switches. The console lit up. Radek whooped in relief, clapping Dax on the shoulder. "Guess this means we can finally get out of this graveyard." The battered soldiers piled into the troop bay. Salira hesitated, standing outside as if considering her next move. Dax caught her eye from the cockpit. "Are you coming or not?" She scanned the horizon, the wind tugging at her braided tendrils. A flicker of doubt passed across her features. Then she stepped aboard. The carrier's engines roared, lifting them off the ground with a burst of dust. Dax angled toward the battered horizon, scanning for a safe spot to land. Their immediate goal was to escape the combat zone, but the bigger question loomed: what next? Could they find refuge? Rally forces for a counterattack? As they soared over the ruins, Salira slid into the co-pilot's seat, her slender fingers hovering over the controls. Dax didn't protest. He needed her help. She might know how to evade further detection. Her voice was quiet when she spoke, lacking its usual bite. "I never thought I'd end up saving Terran soldiers. Let alone working with one." He flicked a glance her way, noticing the tension lines at the corners of her eyes. "And I never thought I'd be flying side by side with an alien who calls us inferior." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "I stand by what I said, but perhaps I underestimated some of you." He offered no reply, just kept his attention on the controls as the carrier rattled through the smoky sky. Yet the air between them felt charged again, echoing with the unspoken possibility of something neither could name. They flew until the carrier's systems started blinking warnings about fuel reserves. Dax set them down in a secluded valley, ringed by jagged hills that would hide them from aerial scans. Rodek and the others quickly set up a perimeter, while Selira wandered a short distance away, surveying the alien sky she'd invaded. Dax found her standing on a rocky outcrop, the wind pulling at the torn sleeve of her suit. He stepped beside her, looking over the devastation that stretched to the horizon. "I never caught your name," he said quietly, realizing only now that neither had formally introduced themselves. Her gaze remained on the dark clouds overhead. "Selira." He repeated it in a low murmur, letting the syllables linger on his tongue. "So, Selira, what now? You still planning on forging that peace treaty?" She hesitated, crossing her arms over her chest. "I have to. Otherwise, this was all for nothing. Once my people realize I've aligned with Terrans, though, they may revoke my status. I'll be considered a rogue agent, maybe even a traitor." Dax's voice softened. "We have a word for that, defector." She gave him a sidelong look. "Is that what you think I am?" He shrugged. "If you want to stop a war, that hardly sounds like treason to me. But I doubt your leaders see it the same way." She let out a hollow laugh. "No, they won't." They stood in silence, each processing the precariousness of their situation. The tension between them had evolved, a mix of respect, wariness, and an undeniable spark that neither fully acknowledged. After a long pause, he spoke again. "I'm not your enemy, Selira. Not anymore. We may not trust each other completely, but I need to know one thing. If we find a chance to end this conflict, will you stand by it? Even if it means standing with me?" Her golden eyes flicked to his face, searching for any trace of deception. Then she took a breath, as if surrendering a part of herself she'd guarded fiercely. "I will." For a moment, they simply gazed at each other, two warriors from opposing worlds, bound by the same desperate cause. The wind whispered through the barren valley, carrying the faint scent of ash and the echo of distant gunfire. Dax reached out, almost without thinking, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. He felt the warmth of her body through the thin suit material. She didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, she let his touch linger for a heartbeat, the glow in her eyes steady. Neither voiced the tension that coiled between them, raw and unspoken. But it was there, thrumming beneath the surface like a second pulse. In the distance, the sky rumbled, promising another storm. With a reluctant sigh, Dax turned away, gesturing for her to follow him back to the makeshift camp. Rodek approached with a grim look. "We've got wounded who won't last long without proper med supplies. We need to move, find a real settlement." Dax nodded. "Understood. We'll push north. There's an outpost near the old city. Might still have resources." Selira studied the ragged group of Terran soldiers, her gaze lingering on each injury. Without another word, she joined in to help gather supplies, her posture tense but determined. It struck Dax then that she was truly committed to aiding them, even though she owed them nothing. They loaded up in the carrier once more, pushing its engines to the brink. The flight north was mercifully quiet, no mercenaries in sight. Perhaps the earlier skirmishes had thinned their ranks, or maybe they were regrouping for a bigger offensive. Either way, Dax didn't let his guard down. When the outpost came into view, his heart sank. The place was half demolished. Whatever war or catastrophe had swept through here had left it in near ruins. Still, they landed, hoping to find any scrap of functioning infrastructure. Rodek and his crew fanned out, searching for med supplies. Selira and Dax checked the main building, a domed structure with thick walls scorched by plasma blasts. Inside, they found a small stash of first aid kits, some rations, and a single operating medical capsule. It wasn't much, but it was something. They hauled the wounded inside, setting them up as best they could. Dax worked in silence, applying bandages and hooking up and for a soldier barely clinging to consciousness. Selira hovered nearby, her expression unreadable. "Thank you," she said softly when they were done, surprising him. He looked up, sweat and dirt smeared across his brow. "For what?" She shrugged, gaze darting away. "For saving them." Even though you could have just looked after yourself, especially after everything you've lost. He exhaled, glancing at the men. They're Terrans. I might not agree with how the higher-ups run this planet, but these soldiers didn't deserve to be left behind. She nodded, something like respect simmering in her eyes. Then Rodek's voice crackled over the calm. Dax, we've got movement outside. Might be more mercs. Dax tensed, gripping his weapon. Selira straightened, an electric current of readiness coursing through her. Together, they moved to the outpost entrance. Peering out, they saw a small group of figures approaching through the twilight. The lead figure raised empty hands in a sign of peace. As they drew closer, Dax realized these weren't mercenaries at all, but ragtag civilians, men, women, and even a few children. Their clothes were tattered, their faces etched with fear. Rodek and his soldiers held position, weapons at the ready. The civilians stopped a safe distance away. A woman with silver-streaked hair stepped forward, speaking in a voice that trembled but did not break. We have nowhere else to go. Our settlement was destroyed in the fighting. Can we stay here, at least for the night? Dax exchanged a look with Rodek, then with Selira. He saw the flicker of empathy cross Selira's face, though she tried to hide it behind a stoic mask. Rodek lowered his rifle. We're not in the business of turning away innocent people, he said gruffly. But we have limited supplies. The woman nodded rapidly. We'll make do. We'll help however we can. A heavy silence settled as the group processed the sudden influx of refugees. Dax felt a stirring of responsibility, though he wasn't officially in charge. In the absence of structured command, leadership fell on whoever had the will to take it. He gestured for the civilians to enter the outpost's outer chambers. Selira watched them pass, her golden gaze lingering on a young child clutching a battered stuffed toy. The child looked up at her, wide-eyed and confused by the teal-skinned stranger. In that moment, Selira's icy demeanor softened so briefly that Dax wondered if he'd imagined it. Then her guard slammed back in place, and she turned away without a word. Night deepened, and they set up crude lighting in the outpost corridors. Exhaustion weighed heavily on everyone, but fear kept them alert. Dax made rounds, ensuring watch shifts were set. He found Selira in a corner of the main hall, leaning against a rusted column, arms folded protectively over her chest. You should rest, he said quietly, though part of him was acutely aware of the simmering tension that sparked whenever they were alone. She gave him a sideways glance. Sleep eludes me. He moved closer, noticing the faint sheen of sweat on her brow. Your energy is low. Is that from overusing whatever that heat ability is? She shrugged, a strand of braided hair falling across her face. It drains me, yes, especially in your planet's atmosphere. The oxygen levels are different. My system works overtime to compensate. Dax hesitated, then reached into a pack. He pulled out a small ration bar, the best they had, and extended it to her. She stared at it before taking it gingerly, peeling back the wrapper. Their fingers brushed, and a spark of awareness flared in his chest. She took a tentative bite, making a face at the bland taste, but continued chewing nonetheless. I suppose this is what humans survive on, she muttered wryly. He smirked. When we're desperate enough. She finished the bar in silence, then slid down the column, sitting cross-legged on the floor. Dax lowered himself beside her, the closeness almost suffocating in its intensity. He didn't know why he felt compelled to stay, only that some unspoken current pulled him in. She spoke first, her voice quieter than he'd ever heard it. Why do you fight? He frowned, taken off guard by the question. You already know. I fight for revenge, for those my brother left behind, for everything the Terran Directorate betrayed. She studied him closely, gold irises reflecting the dim lighting. Does that revenge ever bring solace? He looked away, jaw clenching. No. She nodded, as if that were the answer she expected. Then she let out a long breath, her posture easing slightly. I was trained to see humans as lesser. It was drilled into me that your species was barbaric, short-sighted, incapable of higher thought. But I'm beginning to question that. He raised an eyebrow, an ironic smile tugging at his lips. Questioning your propaganda, or still convinced we're savage? She tilted her head. Savage in some ways, yes. But maybe not, wholly inferior. You have a resilience that's hard to ignore. His heart gave a disconcerting thump at her backhanded compliment. Thanks, I guess. Silence followed, thick with tension that was no longer purely adversarial. Dax felt the warmth radiating from her body. She smelled faintly of something not quite floral, not quite mineral, an alien scent that stirred something primal in his gut. He fought the impulse to close the distance. Instead, he forced himself to focus on more pressing matters. We need to come up with a plan, he said quietly. We can't keep drifting. The mercenaries will find us eventually, or your empire will send more agents if they think you've gone rogue. Her eyes flickered. That's likely. Roddick's voice interrupted over a makeshift intercom. Dax, trouble outside? Come quick. They scrambled to their feet, weapons in hand, the moment shattered. The courtyard of the outpost was in disarray. Several refugees huddled behind debris, while Roddick and his men pointed rifles at a newcomer, a battered Terran officer in partial uniform. The officer, helmet off, raised his hands, eyes wild. Don't shoot. I'm here to warn you. There's a large force of mercs en route, hours away at most. They're sweeping the region to capture or kill any survivors. Dax's eyes narrowed. How do you know? The officer coughed, staggering on unsteady legs. I managed to escape their forward unit. They're well armed, better than anything we can handle. They have orders to shoot on sight. A heavy silence fell. Salira approached, her voice deceptively calm. Did you hear anything about me? My name is Salira. The officer blanched, recognizing her alien features. They said they're hunting an alien infiltrator. Something about shutting down peace talks permanently. They're burning every settlement, so no one can shelter you. Salira's expression hardened. Dax exchanged a grim look with Roddick. We can't fight an entire army with the handful of people we have here, he muttered. Roddick shrugged helplessly. What do we do then? Run? Salira shook her head. They'll catch you eventually. You won't outrun their hovercrafts, and your outpost isn't defensible enough. She hesitated, glancing at Dax. But there might be a way to turn this around. If we can sabotage their command structure, disrupt their control. Dax thought of the comms tower. They must have a central command post somewhere. If we take it out, maybe we can scatter them. Buy ourselves time to contact someone, anyone, who'll help. Roddick considered the idea. You're talking about a direct strike, right? Dax nodded. We lure them away from the civilians, then hit them at their core. High risk, high reward. A murmur spread through the group. Some looked terrified, others resigned. The refugees had nowhere else to go. The wounded Terrans were in no shape for a lengthy retreat. Salira stepped forward, posture regal despite the exhaustion etched across her face. I'll go, she announced, leveling her gaze at the wide-eyed crowd. I'm the reason they're hunting this region so viciously. If Dax comes with me, we stand a chance. A tense hush followed. Dax eyed her, part of him bristling at how she presumed his involvement. But the other part recognized the truth. Together, they had a better shot at pulling this off than anyone else. Roddick inhaled sharply. We'll stay and defend the outpost as best we can, buy you time. Just, if you pull it off, you come back for us. Dax nodded, meeting Roddick's weary eyes. We will. An unspoken agreement passed between them. Salira and Dax gathered what supplies they could, including a compact land speeder from the outpost's hangar. It wasn't in prime condition, but it had enough fuel for a quick trip and hopefully a quick exit. Night pressed in around them as they prepared to leave. Before they mounted the speeder, Salira paused, scanning the camp. Refugees hunched around small fires, children clinging to thin blankets. Terran soldiers stood guard, their faces grim but resolute. She spoke softly to Dax, her voice almost lost in the wind. If we fail, they all die. He tightened his grip on the speeder's handlebars. Then we don't fail. They set off under the cloak of darkness, wind whipping against their faces. The speeder rumbled over broken terrain, each jolt a reminder of how precarious their mission was. Salyra sat behind Dax, arms wrapped around his waist to steady herself. That unexpected contact sent shivers through him, an odd mix of tension and something he refused to name. Every mile brought them closer to danger. Their plan was simple: locate the mercenaries' mobile command center, sabotage their communication array, and strike a crippling blow that would plunge the enemy into disarray. The fact that they had no definite intel on the location or defenses made the mission a near suicide run. But neither of them backed down. In the pre-dawn hours, they crested a ridge overlooking a sprawling encampment of vehicles and tents. The flicker of campfires and the glint of metallic armor confirmed they'd found the mercenary base. It was larger than expected, dozens of armored transports, maybe hundreds of troops. Dax killed the speeder's engine, coasting to a halt behind a rocky outcrop. Damn. We're outnumbered 10-1, maybe more. Salyra's voice was steady. Then we move quietly. Take out key targets, blow their communications, and slip away before they can organize a response. A grim chuckle escaped him. Easier said than done? She placed a hand on his shoulder, and he felt that familiar warmth. We've done the impossible before. They dismounted, creeping closer on foot. The camp spread out in concentric rings, with a central command tent near a cluster of antenna arrays. Sentry drones hovered overhead, scanning the perimeter with bright beams. Salyra motioned for Dax to follow her along a shallow trench leading to the outer edge. They pressed themselves against a metal barrier, waiting for a drone's spotlight to pass. Heart pounding, Dax felt the heat of Salyra's body next to his, every breath synchronized. Her golden eyes flickered at him in the low light, and he nodded, adrenaline surging. Timing it precisely, they slipped under a gap in the barrier, rolling into the shadows behind a parked armored carrier. 2 mercenaries patrolled nearby, oblivious. Dax silently drew his knife. Before the guards could react, he and Salyra struck in unison, swift, lethal. The bodies dropped without a sound. They dragged the corpses into the dark, confiscating keycards and a handheld comm device. Salyra tapped a few buttons, scanning for the command channel. Encrypted, she whispered. But if we're close enough, I can jam their signals temporarily. Dax spotted the main antenna tower in the camp's center. We get there, blow it up, and they'll be blind. We only have one shot. Their approach became a deadly dance of stealth and speed, weaving between tents and vehicles, taking out isolated guards and fluid motions. Each time, Dax felt his blood pump hotter. Every near miss, every successful takedown, stoked the savage thrill of survival. At last, they reached the central hub, a reinforced tower bristling with communication gear. A handful of elite mercenaries guarded it, clad in heavier armor. Dax gritted his teeth, eyeing the advanced weaponry they carried. He had a limited supply of ammunition. Salyra had her powers, but how much could she muster after all this? They crept behind a stack of crates, scanning for an opening. The guards' formation left few blind spots. One false move, and they'd be gunned down. Dax turned to Salyra, whispering, "We need a distraction bigger than a single gunshot." She hesitated, sweat beading on her brow. "If I push too hard, I might collapse. But maybe I can create a thermal illusion." He nodded. "Do it." She closed her eyes, concentrating. A ripple of heat shimmered around her arms. Moments later, an unnatural wave of warmth spread across the area in front of the tower. The guards reacted immediately, confusion etched in their postures as the air seemed to distort. One guard fired wildly at the apparition, while others rushed forward, uncertain. Dax seized the moment, vaulting over the crates and unloading his weapon on the unsuspecting mercs. 2 went down, and the rest stumbled in the haze. Salyra mustered another surge of heat, disorienting them further. With savage efficiency, Dax finished off the remaining guards. They burst into the tower's main control room, stepping over the collapsed bodies of mercenaries. The console screens glowed with lines of data. Salyra staggered, catching herself on the doorway, breathing hard. Dax scanned the setup, locating the core power conduit. "If I overload this," he panted, "it'll fry their entire comm network." She pushed aside her fatigue, moving to help him pry open the panel. Together, they rerouted the power feed, bypassing safety protocols. Sparks erupted, and warning klaxons blared. "Time to run!" Dax shouted, grabbing Salira's arm. They dashed out of the tower just as an explosion rocked the air. Flames spewed from the structure, and the entire mercenary camp erupted in chaos. Confused soldiers scrambled for cover, vehicles revved in disarray, and the overhead drones faltered, losing their communication uplinks. As the camp spiraled into panic, Dax and Salira slipped into the shadows, hearts pounding. They retraced their route, weaving through confusion. A stray bullet whizzed past Salira's ear, but she pressed on, lips set in a grim line. Dax fired back at silhouettes forming in the smoke. At last, they reached the edge of the camp. The stolen speeder waited where they'd left it. They jumped aboard, Dax gunning the engine. With the chaos behind them, they sped off into the dawn sky, adrenaline still coursing through their veins. Only when they were miles away did he ease off the throttle. Salira slumped against him, her breath hitching. He could feel her trembling. "You all right?" he asked, concern piercing his usual gruffness. She nodded weakly. "I just used too much energy." He guided the speeder to a halt by a rocky outcrop, shutting it off. Smoke still rose on the horizon where the mercenary base burned. They had succeeded, but at a cost. He pulled her off the speeder, supporting her weight. She leaned into him, skin feverishly warm. "Sit," he ordered gently, easing her down on a flat boulder. "You need to cool off." He grabbed a canteen, dribbling water into her mouth. She coughed, swallowing carefully. A faint flush colored her cheeks. "I'm not helpless," she murmured, though her voice shook. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Could have fooled me, the way you torched half that camp." A weak smile tugged at her lips, then faded. Her eyes drifted shut, and for a terrifying moment, Dax feared she'd lost consciousness. But she reopened them, gazing at him with a softness he hadn't seen before. "You risked your life back there," she whispered. "For me, for those Terrans." "Why?" He searched her glowing eyes, wrestling with a truth he hadn't wanted to face. "Because I'm tired of letting everything slip away," he said quietly. "I've lost enough. Maybe I'm done losing." She reached up, fingers brushing the side of his face. The contact was light, tentative, but it sent a jolt of electricity through him. 1,000 protests clamored in his mind. This was wrong, she was the enemy, they were in the middle of a war. Yet, in that moment, none of it stopped him from leaning closer. He could feel her breath on his lips, hot and unsteady. The surge of desire blindsided him, an instinctive, primal reaction that threatened to override caution. Her gaze locked on his mouth, her parted lips glistening with a sheen of sweat. But neither moved further. The tension between them was a tightrope stretched to its breaking point, charged with every unspoken admission, every suppressed attraction. For a few unbearable heartbeats, they hovered on the brink. Then Dax drew back, jaw clenched. "We should get going. Radek and the others are waiting." She exhaled, perhaps in relief, perhaps in frustration. "Yes," she managed, voice husky. "We should." He helped her back onto the speeder, heart still hammering. They set off toward the outposts, smoke and sunlight mingling in the sky behind them. Neither spoke, but the air was thick with everything they couldn't say. When they arrived, the mood at the outpost was tense but hopeful. Mercenaries had tried another small assault, but with their communications down, it lacked coordination. Radek and his men had managed to repel the attack. Civilians huddled in the corridors, praying for rescue. Dax and Salira relayed the news of their successful sabotage. A cautious optimism spread among the survivors. Maybe they had a fighting chance after all. Some even looked at Salira with newfound respect. Yet the hour that followed brought new challenges. A battered Terran scout vehicle pulled up, its driver stumbling out with a grim report. "A second wave is inbound. Larger, heavier firepower. They're probably regrouping from the damage you did." A wave of dread rippled through the outpost. They had wounded civilians, meager defenses. Even with the mercenaries' calms disrupted, A large enough force would overrun them. Rodek paced, fists clenched. Damn it! We buy time, but we can't survive an all-out assault. Salira pressed a hand to her temple, eyes fluttering as she concentrated. There might be another way, she murmured. My people have technology that can cloak a small area, if we can power it. I can send an encoded signal to any sympathetic faction within my empire, requesting an emergency drop of the device. Dax frowned. And you think they'll deliver? She shrugged. It's a long shot. But some in my empire truly want peace. If they see I'm still alive, they might risk it. Rodek let out a bitter laugh. So our best hope is pinned on alien tech that might never arrive? Salira squared her shoulders, the arrogance returning. Your best hope, Terran, is me. An uneasy hush settled, but in the end, there was no better plan. With a determined look, Salira moved to the outpost's comm station, barely functional, but maybe enough to send a narrow-beam transmission. Dax followed, standing guard. She manipulated the frequencies, muttering in an alien tongue. Symbols scrolled across the battered screen. Her voice took on a resonant hum, occasionally slipping into subharmonics that made the console vibrate. Dax couldn't help but watch her in fascination. She was so fierce, so utterly different from anyone he'd known, yet here she was, risking everything for a chance at peace. After a few minutes, she cut the transmission, exhaling shakily. It's done. If they receive it, they'll come. Dax nodded, uncertain. How long until we know? Soon. Or never. She sighed, stepping away from the console. We should prepare for battle regardless. Time blurred as the outposts braced for the onslaught. Walls were fortified with scrap metal. Civilians were given basic instructions to hide in the safest compartments. Dax and Rodek rallied every able-bodied fighter, distributing weapons and ammo. Salira paced the corridors, eyes gleaming with renewed energy, as if adrenaline alone was sustaining her. Dawn broke over the horizon, painting the ruined cityscape in muted reds and oranges. The mercenaries didn't make them wait long. A distant rumble signaled the approach of heavy armor. Dust clouds rose on the horizon, swirling in the morning light. Dax took position on a rooftop overlooking the main thoroughfare, rifle at the ready. Salira joined him, scanning the horizon with a calm that belied the tremor in her fingers. They're coming, she said softly. Below, refugees clutched each other, fear etched in every line of their faces. Terran soldiers tightened their grips on rifles, determined but outnumbered. This was a last stand if no help arrived. Engines roared, and the first wave of armored transports appeared. Mercenaries in black exosuits disembarked, taking formation. Laser fire crackled, forcing Dax to duck behind a crumbling parapet. He returned fire, picking off 2 mercs. Salira inhaled deeply, stepping to the edge. With a fierce expression, she unleashed a wave of concentrated heat. A cluster of mercenaries screamed as their armor heated to intolerable levels. But more poured in, bullets and plasma bolts peppering the rooftop, forcing her back. All across the outpost, the battle raged. Rodek's squad tried to hold the gates, but cracks appeared in their defense. Even with disrupted comms, sheer numbers threatened to overwhelm them. Explosions rocked the walls, sending chunks of concrete raining down. Dax's rifle clicked empty. He cursed, flinging it aside and drawing his sidearm. We can't hold them off forever, he hissed. Salira nodded grimly, panting from the exertion of her heat attacks. If we're going down, at least we'll make it cost them. A sudden piercing sound cut through the chaos, a high-pitched whine that made the air vibrate. Dax froze, scanning the skies. A streak of silver shot overhead, followed by another, then a third. They weren't Terran ships, nor mercenary crafts. Their design was sleek and unfamiliar, glowing with a faint teal luminescence. Salira's eyes widened. They came, she breathed, all lacing her words. The alien ships zoomed across the battlefield, dropping small canisters that erupted in pulses of crackling energy. The pulses expanded like translucent domes, disorienting the mercenaries and shorting out their weapons. A second volley of canisters slammed into the ground near the outpost's perimeter, generating a defensive shield that shimmered in the sunlight. Dax and Selira watched as the mercenary lines descended into chaos. Their exosuits malfunctioned. Vehicles sputtered and stalled. In minutes, the tide of battle shifted dramatically. Alien soldiers, clad in elegant armor reminiscent of Selira's style, descended from the ships, securing the perimeter with efficient precision. Cheers erupted among the Terrans in the outpost as they realized salvation had arrived. The mercenaries, cut off and crippled, either surrendered or fled into the ruins. The newcomers kept them in check with advanced weaponry, all while maintaining a respectful distance from the outpost's defenders. Dax let out a shaky breath, adrenaline still coursing through him. He turned to Selira, who sagged with relief. A faint smile graced her lips as she looked back at him, something bright and triumphant in her golden eyes. They descended from the rooftop, hearts still hammering. One of the alien soldiers approached, removing his helmet to reveal features similar to Selira's: teal skin, luminous eyes. He bowed his head. "Emissary, we received your signal. The Council of Peace has authorized immediate assistance." Selira's voice trembled with gratitude, but she kept her regal composure. "You've arrived just in time. We have wounded and refugees who need care." The soldier nodded. "We come in peace. Our medical teams are already deploying." Dax watched, half in disbelief, as the alien forces moved swiftly through the outpost, providing aid to Terran soldiers and civilians alike. Tension remained, but it was tempered by the relief that the immediate threat was over. Roddick approached Dax, a stunned expression on his face. "We're being rescued by aliens. Never thought I'd see the day." Dax managed a tight smile. "We live in strange times." Selira oversaw the operation, guiding her people to coordinate with the Terrans. It was surreal, a united effort after all the bloodshed. When she finished directing a medic to an injured child, she turned to Dax. "I believe this is what you'd call a turning point." He inclined his head. "Maybe. At least it's a reprieve from the slaughter." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a more intimate tone. "Your people will survive. The path to peace might be clearer now. But for me, I'm a pariah to those who wanted war." He exhaled, eyes flicking over her face. "Then stay. Work with us to keep it from ever happening again." She studied him for a long moment, golden eyes unblinking. "You realize what that entails? I'd have to negotiate with your leaders, maintain alliances, fight endless battles in conference halls instead of war zones." He smirked. "Sounds like a pain in the ass. But you handled me. You can handle them." A warm laugh escaped her, surprising them both. Then her expression sobered. "What about you? Your vendetta against the Directorate, your life in the shadows. Are you ready to step into the light?" His smirk faded. He thought of his brother, of the endless cycle of revenge he'd been locked in. He felt an unfamiliar sense of hope stirring. "Maybe I'm ready to stop running. To start building something that won't crumble." She lifted a hand, brushing it against his cheek. This time, he didn't shy away. The ferocity they once shared in combat now morphed into a different kind of intensity, potent and magnetic. Her fingers were warm against his skin, and her voice turned husky. "I called humans inferior. Perhaps I was hasty." His heartbeat pounded. They stood in the middle of a war-torn outpost, alien soldiers mingling with Terran refugees. Yet at this moment, it felt like only the two of them existed. He slid an arm around her waist, pulling her closer. Her breath caught, but she didn't resist. No gentle preamble or uncertain glance broke the charged tension. Their lips met with a force that bordered on desperation. The taste of sweat, dust, and raw need ignited a different kind of battle, one for dominance and surrender all at once. She gripped his hair, a low sound escaping her throat. He angled her head, deepening the kiss until the world around them blurred. When they finally broke apart, gasping, he could see the reflection of the sky in her eyes. "That was," he began. She silenced him with a finger to his lips, smirking. "A concession." He chuckled, pressing his forehead to hers. The heat of her body meshed with his own, and it felt like the first truly human, or alien, moment of solace he'd experienced in years. They stayed like that, locked in a quiet exchange of breath and heartbeat, until the shifting bustle of the outpost demanded their attention. Selira stepped back, head held high, though her lips were still parted with lingering desire. Together, they walked to greet the alien commander and the Terran leaders who were now trickling in from hidden bunkers and battered shelters. Confusion reigned, but also a flicker of unity. If these two species could stand side by side against a common threat, perhaps there was hope for lasting peace. The hours that followed were a blur of negotiations, medical triage, and cleanup. Selira took charge, smoothing over tensions between her people and the wary Terrans. Dax played his part, using his rogue knowledge to broker information and reassure suspicious soldiers. By dusk, an uneasy truce settled over the region. The mercenaries were scattered, their backers humiliated. The Council of Peace from Selira's empire established a temporary checkpoint, sharing resources. Terran military officials, once reluctant to accept alien aid, found themselves forced to admit that collaboration might be Earth's best chance for survival. Dax and Selira reconvened in a quiet corner of the outpost, away from the negotiations and prying eyes. The setting sun cast long shadows across their faces. She leaned against a half-broken wall, crossing her arms. He stood beside her, hooking his thumbs in his belt loops. "So," he said softly, "this is the new normal." She tilted her head, observing the swirl of activity in the courtyard. "It could be. Unless someone else tries to sabotage the peace." He exhaled a long breath. "It's never going to be simple." She turned to face him, stepping into his space with that same unwavering confidence. "Nothing worth having ever is." He didn't resist when she placed her hands on his chest. The day had been brutal, but her touch was oddly grounding. The memory of their kiss still pulsed through him, and he wondered if this was the start of something real, or just a fleeting connection forged by crisis. But then she smiled, a genuine, disarming smile that banished his doubts for a moment. "For now, at least, we've won a victory." He slid an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "And I intend to enjoy it." They didn't kiss again, not here in the midst of watchful eyes and political chaos. But the intimacy of their proximity, the soft tension in their locked gaze, was enough. It promised more than lust or fleeting alliance. It promised something that felt dangerously like hope. As the sun slipped behind the ruined skyline, Dax held Selira against him, their hearts pounding in quiet unison. The final remnants of day bled into the horizon, and in the growing darkness, they found a flicker of light within each other. Neither of them knew the future's shape, whether war would resume or if a lasting peace could truly be forged. But for now, they stood as living proof of possibility, a once rogue human soldier and an alien emissary, bound by conflict, desire, and the fragile beginnings of trust. No more walls, no more illusions. They had risked everything, confronted their own prejudices and fears, and in doing so, had saved countless lives. Selira brushed a hand over his cheek, a final tender gesture before they stepped back into the crowd. "Come on," she whispered, voice catching on the edge of fond exasperation. "They'll need us for the next round of talks." He followed her into the makeshift command center, heart thudding with an unfamiliar warmth. He was leaving behind the single-minded pursuit of vengeance for something bigger, something that included her, and maybe even included a future worth protecting. In the battered remains of an outpost once marked for destruction, they found a decisive end to the cycle of hatred. And though countless challenges still loomed on the horizon, the alliance they forged this day, fueled by a primal, undeniable connection, felt like it would endure. A hush descended as Terran officials and alien delegates paused to regard the unlikely pair entering side by side. Dax inclined his head, and Selira held theirs with regal confidence. The final moment, brimming with shared resolve, belonged to them. No cliffhangers remained, no unresolved debts. The time for lingering in the shadows was done. They had found each other in the midst of destruction, turned hostility into partnership, and forged a bond that was as fierce as it was inevitable. This was their story's natural conclusion, a raw, primal love shaped by conflict, tested by betrayal, and sealed by undeniable need. And as far as Dax was concerned, It was an ending worth fighting for.